So I'd love to start with you getting invited to an internet community in 1981. How exactly did that happen?
In 1981, there was only what we call bulletin boards. These were kind of like internet threads that were hosted often in people's bedrooms, because you had to build your machine to host it, and you had to dial up. You had to use your telephone line to dial in directly, and there was a limit on the number of people that could be joining at one time. So you'd often get a busy signal, and these were passed around. The numbers that you could call were passed around. You almost had to be invited, because how else would you hear about on the number? And so some of the earliest in 81 were these bulletin boards that were being shared, not on the internet, because there wasn't an internet at the time. They were being passed by email, which was CompuServe or Prodigy. So my invitations were it was very, very local. But later on, a few years later, I had an invitation to join an experimental jacked up version of this, where they could have 100 people at once, 200 people at the same time, interacting with multiple threads. And that was sort of the beginning of what we now know as kind of the internet. But that also required an invitation, because it was an experiment. It was being run by a nonprofit. They were kind of exploring what happens when people can talk virtually. And so it was called the EYES network. And I learned so much from that. In fact, very quickly began to see some of the same kind of behaviors that we would see later on, like we call them flame wars, where people who were ordinarily very soft-spoken would become different people online. There was trolling. We saw the first evidence of trolling, which this medium was built for trolling. It became very easy. Again, people who ordinarily would not be as misbehaving found themselves becoming trolls. And so that taught me a lot about what was going to be coming later on.
When you looked at it, were you like, what is going on? This is going to transform society. What was your initial perception in those early days?
It was a combination of things. I think part of it was simply perplexity and wondering if this would scale, wondering how it would scale, whether it would ever appeal to other people. It was a little bit like CB radio. Like, is this CB radio where it's just going to be kind of people talking about CB radio? Or you could feel potential. You could feel the potential, but it was really unclear whether the potential would ever be realized. It's a little bit like, I don't know, it's like blockchain today. You feel the potential, but really, is it really ever going to become a thing unto itself? It's unclear. So there was definitely this feeling that this was powerful technology, but the people who were using it were mostly kids and boys and young men. And, could it be domestic? Could it be ever? And it required way too much programming skills, we'll call it. It wasn't visual. It was all text. You had to do C prompt. You had to memorize stuff. So it was not evident that it would leave that form very soon. You could kind of imagine something way in the future, but it was not clear that was going to be it. So there was many strikes against it becoming widespread, but I could feel that potential.
And when you were seeing the potential, did you then want to bring it to more people?
I started writing about it. Yes, I started writing about it, and I wrote a story in 1984 for a magazine called New Age Journal, which was, as you can guess, it was very new agey. But I was talking about, I called it the Network Nation, and I kind of went out and visited lots of these erupting parts of this network nation, including a lot of kind of spiritual, new agey kind of sites that were trying to do things, how you do online prayer, and it was really kind of interesting experiment. So there were a bunch of experiments, and I was reporting on it saying, look, there's a new continent erupting. It's just like a different place. And here are little glimpses of it. I don't know where it's going, but here's where it is. And so yeah, my inclination was to share and to write about it.
Were you always that way as a little kid, just observing things and wanting to share about it?
Yes, even in high school, I was recommending things, discovering what people were interested in, and then saying, hey, you should know about this, or hey, this is you'll like this book, or here's a mail order catalog you should know about. Yes, that was my natural thing. I did a newsletter in high school. I made a rock and roll music video in '69, and yeah, I kind of was someone who naturally is compulsively likes to share stuff that I find.